Happy Friday morning and welcome to Buckeye Breakdown as we get ready to preview the Buckeyes and Bucky Badger. Wisconsin coming to town for the Big Ten opener. Plenty to talk about, give you ideas of who we're watching for, what we think is most important, and why the series has so heavily favored the Buckeyes here these last few years. It's our Friday morning preview show on Buckeye Breakdown. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All-Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, hi again, everybody, and thanks for making Buckeye Breakdown part of your Ohio State football pregame stop. We are glad to have you, and certainly looking forward to talking about a huge game here this weekend. I'm Brendan Gulick. If you are just joining us for the first time, thanks for becoming part of our community. We'd love to have you more often. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do lots of these shows all throughout the week. We'll certainly give you our post-game reaction as well. You can find this wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts on audio-only platforms as well. Check out all of our work at BuckeyesNow.com. Special guest, and he's kind of the pinch hitter. He's the ultimate pinch hitter this weekend. Want to introduce you to Jon Rudder, who's actually going to be filling in for me this Saturday. I've got a family wedding that I'm attending, and Jon is going to take care of making sure you've got everything you need. So I figured what better way to introduce Jon and get us ready to go than to have him on the Friday pod. What's up?
What's up, man? Fall weddings. Does anybody ever learn, right?
You know, I have, I've learned to bite my tongue. We go from there. You know, it's, if you're into football, you understand that part of the conversation. If football's not part of your everyday life or your vernacular, then you make different decisions, and that's okay. But looking forward to a fun family weekend for sure.
Yeah,
in the meantime,
too.
Yeah, no kidding. A good game for you to be pinch hitting for, because this is going to be. There's reason to think this could be a showdown preview of a Big Ten championship. It certainly has been in years past, and I think there's lots of fun angles we can dive into. So let's go right off the top. Ohio State's beaten Wisconsin 8 straight times. They've beaten them 11 of the last 12. In fact, Wisconsin hasn't beaten the Buckeyes this decade. 2010, the last time they won a game. They haven't come to Columbus and won since 2004. Obviously, they don't play a whole lot, right? The Bucks and the Badgers last met in 2019 in the Big Ten title game. But it's a fun matchup for both fan bases, because I think people sort of understand that in the West, a lot of times in the last decade, you've kind of got to go through Madison to get to Indianapolis. And it's the same story the last decade plus now. And in Columbus, you got to get through Ohio State. So it feels like a big matchup. And gosh, to kick off Big Ten play, how cool is that?
Yeah, it really does. And I think when you think of Big Ten football, obviously Ohio State, the Michigans, the Penn States come to mind. But I think Wisconsin is kind of right behind them. And, you want to talk about when, building a program, I think that this is a program that has a distinct identity. That university, that school, that city identifies with that identity. And look, they've done a good job of building that success. They just haven't been able to get over the hump when it comes specifically to the Buckeyes. And you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. A team that really feels like they came into the year with a lot of expectations, with the goal of maybe circling this matchup with Ohio State as kind of a litmus test to how they can measure up and potentially maybe be a Big Ten championship game preview. This is a team, I think, that wanted to come into the season and have their sights set on that Big Ten championship game. And look, to be the best, you got to beat the best. And they've got an opportunity or a chance to go into Columbus and do that on Saturday night.
And look, I mean, even though Wisconsin has already stubbed its toe early in the year with a week 2 loss to Washington State, I don't know how else to say this nicely. The West has not been very good. Northwestern's had a really bad year. Illinois hasn't looked good. Purdue really struggled last weekend against Syracuse, and they kind of choked away the game to Penn State in week 1. Iowa's defense looks terrific, and their special teams look great. And it looks like they don't have an offense because they really haven't showcased that very well. I'm not trying to nitpick too much, but I mean, Nebraska's already fired their coach in Scott Frost. So even though Wisconsin hasn't gotten off to a good start, I mean, gosh, the Badgers have to feel like there is no reason we can't still go out and win the West. And by the way, if we play a team like Ohio State early in the year, kind of figure out what the measuring stick could look like, and then go from there and build off that, I think that could be really good for this team.
Yeah, they still control their own destiny, certainly. And look, I get a lot of sense of disappointment on that Wisconsin side. And you just touched on a disappointing loss early on, a close loss to Washington State. I think that this is a program and a team that is really looking to generate some momentum, specifically kicking off Big Ten play. They're looking for a statement win and a signature win. And look, there aren't many statements that speak louder than a win against Ohio State. They've got their work cut out for them, certainly, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes. A double-digit underdog, but they've kind of admitted as much with some of the comments that their coaches and their players have made this week that, like, look, they're looking at this Ohio State game as a big opportunity to do something. This is a big game. This game means a lot for them. They're putting a lot of work and preparation into that, and I think that that's something that will probably be reflected on the field. Whether or not they have the guns to keep up with Ohio State, I think that that's a different conversation, but I certainly think that this is a team that's going to come in and be prepared. When I think of Wisconsin, we talked about, the identity that this program has. I think of, big, strong offensive linemen. This is a team that's going to want to come in, run the ball. They've established that identity. I think of Joe Thomas. So that's the first name that usually comes to mind when you think of, being here in Cleveland, when you think of a Wisconsin offensive lineman. So they're going to come in. They're going to be fundamentally sound. They're not going to make a whole lot of mistakes. So you're going to have to play pretty good football as well. But I'm not quite sure if they have the horses to keep up with Ohio State.
And look, their defense has been terrific. Jim Leonard's done an unbelievable job. In fact, he turned down an opportunity to coach with the Packers this year, even though he lost 7 starters on this defense. So he must feel, one, a special loyalty and affection for his time in Madison, but 2, he must really like what he's got, because nobody turns down opportunities to coach for the Packers unless they feel pretty darn good about what their current situation is.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Wisconsin, they're going to be missing a bunch of guys in the secondary this weekend.
What a time to be missing guys in the secondary, right?
Yeah, that doesn't really bode well. I think the teams that are capable of beating Ohio State, as few as they are ones that are going to have to be able to try and, you're not going to win a shootout, but you certainly have to outscore them. I know that sounds dumb, but you're not going to beat Ohio State if you score less than 30 points in a game. It's just not going to happen. So I look at knowing what Wisconsin is capable of defensively, historically, and seemingly what they've done fairly well so far this year, and looking at what their offense currently looks like. Graham Mertz has taken significant steps forward. Braylon Allen is a very good running back. They seem to have a little bit of depth there. Their offensive line is strong. I'm not 100% sold on their wide receiver group, but they're okay. Let's see what they're capable of against a really good Ohio State defense, or at least what we think is a good Buckeye defense. But I'm skeptical in thinking that they're going to be able to score, at least 30 points to try to give Ohio State a scare.
Yeah, and you talk about a guy like Jim Leonard. This is a guy that's about as Wisconsin as it gets, right? I think that he certainly identifies with being a Wisconsinite, a lot of pride in that Badger program, and the defense kind of is built in his mold. I think that they've given up 24 points this season. Granted, they have not faced an offense like Ohio State. And you touched on the firepower that Ohio State has.
New Mexico State isn't quite like Ohio State.
Right, yeah, exactly. And it's just so difficult to keep an offense like that held down for 60 minutes. Look at the Notre Dame game. All it takes is 1 or 2 plays for a guy to get loose, and you're able to put up a couple of scores and push things out of reach. And I think that that's maybe another situation that we're going to be looking at with this game between Ohio State and Wisconsin Saturday night at Ohio Stadium. I think that, even if Wisconsin is able to keep it close in the early part of that, look, you've got CJ Stroud, you've got a stable of running backs outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jackson Smith and Jigba. You still got a plethora of receivers that he can throw to. And now CJ Stroud is even starting to incorporate the tight end. I think that shows a lot of maturity in his progression as a passer. There are just so many weapons that Wisconsin's going to have to keep track of. And that's a difficult task, specifically when you're missing guys in the secondary.
Yeah, it's a difficult task for anybody in the country, even including a Georgia defense that has everybody's eyes popping out of their head right now. If they didn't give up a touchdown last week to South Carolina in the final, was it minute or 2 minutes of the game, I think they've outscored their opponents this year 130 to 10 or something like that. I mean, and by the way, it's not like they've played nobody. That includes Oregon and an SEC team in South Carolina. It's not a FCS school with a bunch of guys that aren't even on scholarship. We're talking about what looks like maybe another elite defense for Georgia. So I don't know. I don't want to get too far down the line. I know everybody in the country right now is hoping that maybe we'll get this year what we didn't get last year, an opportunity to see those two juggernauts go against each other. But there's a lot of football to play between now and then. A couple of cool notes that I think are just worth sharing that maybe you didn't know. The Wisconsin Sports Information staff actually shared this with us. This was great. Ohio State leads the country with a nearly 94% winning percentage. It's .938 in conference play between 2014 and 2021 at the end of the season. It's actually I would say significantly better than Alabama. The Buckeyes are 61-5 in conference play since the start of 2014. They're actually, if you go back even further, since 2012, the Buckeyes are 77-5 in Big Ten play. They have been the team in the conference, and I don't think we need to go through all the superlatives, but I think it brings into focus when you're the top dog and you've got that target on your back. You have to understand that teams are going to try to scheme things knowing that you're the biggest game on their schedule. They're going to try to scheme things up that they haven't put on tape before. They're going to try to give you different looks that hopefully you haven't prepared for, because at the end of the day, it comes down to execution, right? Like, it's easy to look on paper and say they got this many 5-stars or that many playmakers at that position or whatever. As a team, Wisconsin doesn't care. They know the challenge. They know they've got to go out and play really well. But I'm sure they are practicing this week with the belief that, hey, we like our chances. We got a good team. App State went and beat Texas A&M on the road. You look at some of the other upsets around the country, Marshall going on the road and beating Notre Dame. Why can't we go beat Ohio State? We're better than some of those other non-Power 5 programs. So they don't approach this as an unwinnable game just because the Buckeyes have the talent that they have. You just got to try to figure out what your scheme is and what your game plan is. And if you're Wisconsin, you run the ball, you figure out a way to shorten the game as much as you can. You can't turn it over. You have to find a way to make Ohio State pay for a couple of mistakes here and there. And you try to just mitigate what CJ Stroud and company have shown that their high-level execution can be.
Yeah, I think you literally just took the words right out of my mouth. I had something highlighted on my screen there. The best defense, I think, is going to be a good offense, and that's keeping the ball out of CJ Stroud's hands, because the more chances he gets, the more opportunities he's going to have to get the ball into those playmakers' hands. And boom, next thing you know, you're down 6, 14, 21 points. But the good thing about this situation is, Ohio State's got a good leader in Ryan Day, right? Probably about as good a coach as you can ask for across the country. This is not unfamiliar territory for him to be in the crosshairs and to know that you're getting everybody's best shot. I don't think that that's something that he shies away from. I think that that's something that he certainly prepares for. And I kind of look to see him maybe take the same approach that he has taken the last couple of weeks in instilling on his players. Look, hey, we got to start fast. We got to be clean out of the gate. Let's not give them any reason to think that they can hang around. And they've certainly got a lot of momentum coming into this one, hanging 77 points on Toledo. Granted, there's Wisconsin's no Toledo, but they've got all the momentum in the world. And I think that if you're looking for if you're talking about a tune-up game, man, things went about as perfectly as they could have gone for Ohio State in that matchup with Toledo to really set things up here nicely as we head into Big Ten play.
Yeah, they certainly did. And you can make the same argument for Wisconsin after having a tough week 2 loss. They shook that off quickly against probably, if not the worst team, certainly among the least productive teams in FBS. New Mexico State's program is not very good right now. So both teams come in feeling good. They've got some momentum, and they recognize the gravity of the moment. I mean, the Buckeyes, Ryan Day talked about this. If you look back at their schedule, after the Notre Dame game, Ohio State basically played 4 consecutive top 10 games nationally. Michigan State, Michigan, Utah, and Notre Dame, 4 games in a row from last year to this year. You get 2 non-conference games against non-Power 5 teams that, look, I actually think Toledo's going to win a bunch of games in the MAC this year. DeQuan Finn is a very good quarterback. I don't know what he's doing at Toledo. And I thought Arkansas State. Yeah, no kidding. And honestly, it may have been his audition tape to go play elsewhere next year. And Arkansas State, I mean, Champ Flemings in particular, the little wide receiver they had was really good. I thought they did some good things, and maybe they'll compete for a little bit in the Sun Belt. They've got a great coaching staff there. So it's not like the Buckeyes played nobody the last 2 weeks, but they weren't top 10 teams. Now you're playing a Wisconsin team that is not of that same caliber, at least in the national pollsters' eyes this year. But it's a program that expects to win big games, and they've proven that they can do it over the last several years. So they don't really care the fact that they're not ranked. They're going to come in and try to play spoiler in Columbus. What an unbelievable treat we hope, we expect to open Big Ten play with.
Yeah, I don't want to call this necessarily a trap game or even say that Wisconsin is a team that can necessarily sneak up on Ohio State, but it's certainly a team that I think is capable of beating Ohio State if everything goes right. Look, a couple of years ago, Purdue beat Ohio State, and those teams weren't even necessarily, should have been on the same field together. It just depends on what plays out on any given day. And I think that, when you have a slow start, granted, this game is in Ohio Stadium as opposed to being on the road. Do they play an away game in the month of September? I don't think they go on the road until mid-October. I think
unbelievable the way that this has to be like Ohio State's most fan-friendly, favorable home schedule. I mean, I know you play in East Lansing and I know you play in Happy Valley. You're not going to play everybody at home. But to start with basically a month's worth of games at home, Notre Dame, Arkansas State, Toledo, Wisconsin, Rutgers, all at home, all in a row before you even go play at Michigan State in 2 weeks. That's quite a blessing.
and some good matchups too. Like, these aren't just your typical Youngstown States or Marshalls or Ohio Universities. You talk Notre Dame, we've got Wisconsin that we're kicking off the Big Ten schedule with. I think that it's a time that, look, Ohio State's looking at this as an opportunity to really tune things up and refine things as they head into Big Ten season with that matchup with Michigan looming at the end of the schedule.
And everybody is certainly hoping and expecting that those two teams are going to be, right on the cusp of a college football playoff berth when they meet in late November. Couple little things we should get to. How about TreVeyon Henderson? There's a lot of conversation around him right now. TreVeyon obviously started the game last week against Toledo, ended up scoring the first of the 11 touchdowns the Buckeyes put in. I thought he ran fairly hard, but he came out of the game. I'm sure by now he's dealing with some kind of a left leg injury. If you didn't see it or you didn't hear about it, he walked to the locker room without a shoe on. He's kind of gingerly walking back there, came back to the sideline, after maybe 15 minutes. He was on his feet the entire game. He never went back onto the field, but his pads were on. He was smiling and with his teammates, up on his feet all night. So it became obvious, I thought, that he was not dealing with some crazy, awful, tough injury. And, there was no reason to put him back out there before you start conference play. So Ryan Day was basically asked on Tuesday this week at his press conference about TreVeyon's status. The latest thing we have for you as we shoot this podcast this week is that he expects TreVeyon to be ready, but he also expected Jackson Smith-Njigba and Julian Fleming to both be ready for week 2, and they weren't. So we'll see as the week goes along. We'll keep you updated on BuckeyesNow.com with the latest around Henderson. I kind of expect that TreVeyon is going to play, but I think he won't see the lion's share of the carries with the way Mayan Williams has run this year, and frankly, with the way Dallin Hayden ran in some critical moments last week.
Yeah, I was just about to say, having him in the backfield, having TreVeyon Henderson in the backfield adds a different dynamic to this Ohio State offense. But look, they still had two guys rush for almost 100 yards a pop each last week in his absence. So they've certainly got some capable guys that are able to step in and carry the load. If things are going well for you early on in the game, you're able to kind of maybe, rest Henderson a little bit and give him a lighter workload. I think that, I'm kind of in agreement with you. Seemed like something certainly precautionary. He was, I think I saw some photos of him or some video of him maybe signing autographs or taking pictures with fans after the game. He was in that walking boot, but he seemed to be moving around okay. So Hopefully this isn't something long-term. It doesn't appear like there's any indication that this would be anything long-term, but it would be easy for them to kind of ease him back into the offense. Or I guess it would be beneficial for them to ease him back into the offense with so many weapons that they have this week against Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I think it would be good for him to, get a couple of Big Ten carries under his belt, even if he's not 100%. I know
I'm sure
Ryan
he wants
Day,
to.
right. And I know Ryan Day tends to shy away from the idea of playing a guy if he isn't 100%. But if he's 90%, is that good enough to put him out there and, give him a chance to carry it 10 times? I don't know. I mean, you certainly don't want to put somebody in a position to get hurt. And
I don't think there's any long-term injury implications here.
And Ryan's been really good. Ryan's been really good about making sure he's not putting guys in bad spots. As it relates to the defense, we were surprised, I guess, last weekend. See Mike Hall and Tanner McAllister and Josh Proctor all not play because none of them were listed on the game day status report as unavailable, but then none of them got on the field. Mike Hall was in pads. I know for sure Josh Proctor was in street clothes on the sideline. Honestly, I don't remember if Tanner McAllister was in street clothes or not, but we'll keep our eye open to see if those guys are going to play. I'm sure they are hopeful to be out there, and we haven't heard anything out of the Woody this week to indicate that they wouldn't be available, but I guess we'll wait and see what the availability report says when it comes out on Saturday. But safe to say that, especially considering Wisconsin's offensive line, I sure would hope Ohio State has its best defensive lineman available.
Yeah, and that this is probably, we talked about this being the biggest test for Wisconsin's defense. I think, on the flip side, this is the biggest test for Ohio State's defense, perhaps. We know what Wisconsin's going to do. We talked about the big offensive line. We talked about the backs that they have. And Ohio State's defense, I thought it looked pretty good so far, especially coming into a new system under Jim Knowles, and they're 3 games into this, pretty stout so far. And I look to see that continue to progress. But having 3 of your key guys on the defensive line, especially when you got a team coming into your house that is going to try and run it down your throat, is going to help you there.
Yeah, and trying to defend that with a 4-2-5 defense was a question Jim Knowles was asked about this week. Is essentially like, look, you know what they like to do. How do you try to do that without 3 linebackers on the field? And Knowles, acknowledged that there was probably a time in his career where he would have felt similarly that it might be difficult to stop the run with a 4-2-5 defense. But he said if you can make the offensive linemen have a little bit of hesitation, just that split second of indecision, you take the wrong step or you hesitate or whatever it might be, then you can kind of play offense on defense. And suddenly you are the one that's sort of dictating as a defender how that situation goes. We've certainly seen a few exotic blitz schemes from him. We've seen some really aggressive stuff in these first few weeks. I'm sure he's got a few more things dialed up we haven't seen because that's who Jim Knowles is. But they're going to have their work cut out for him because I'm sure Wisconsin's going to try to run the football.
Yeah, you tend to kind of keep things fairly vanilla in those early games, but it's tough to do when you have a matchup like Notre Dame on the schedule. You've got Wisconsin here fairly early in the schedule as you're kicking off the Big Ten season. But guys are so athletic now that even if you're maybe lacking a little bit of size, you can use some movement and some personnel and some groupings that can confuse the offensive line, as you mentioned, and cause that hesitation. The caliber of athlete that Ohio State is recruiting right now is just off the charts. And I think that that's one of the look on both sides of the football, why they're able to have so much success. And I'm looking for a good matchup with Wisconsin's offense here on Saturday night.
This can be a ton of fun. It's the beginning of the 110th season of Big Ten Conference play as the Buckeyes host Wisconsin, 7:30 down at the Shoe. Believe it or not, this is the 99th all-time game that Ohio State has played at night. How about that?
They're wearing the blackout uniforms I saw.
And it is a blackout thanks to Andrew Lind, who I want to make sure I say this the right way as I look at the game notes. Our own Andrew Lind was tickled that the game notes included him in football's fall fashions. And it said, after noting a couple of things about the Ohio State black uniforms this weekend, the notes say, much appreciation to Andrew Lind, the Ohio State Beats, quote, king of cloth, and his website, ohiostateuniforms.com, for documenting Ohio State football's fall fashions. I think Andrew's going to get that framed and put somewhere. He was pretty stoked yesterday, or I should say on Tuesday when he saw that. So that was cool for him. But yeah, it should be fun. Wear black. The fans are certainly encouraged to join in on that and wear black this weekend as well, as the Buckeyes kick off with Wisconsin 7:30 at the Shoe. If you're not at the game, Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, Holly Rowe have the call on ABC. It's also on ESPN Radio nationally, but of course, locally in Columbus, you can hear it on the Ohio State Buckeyes Radio Network with Paul Keels, who's in his 25th year, by the way. Congratulations to Paul Keels on hitting the quarter-century mark. Paul with Jim Lachey, of course. Matt Andrews and Skip Mossick will be in the booth as well. John, looking forward to your coverage on Saturday. I know it's a night game. You know, the wedding is in the afternoon. The stuff that I've got going on at night, I'll be monitoring, man. I'm gonna have my phone available. I'm gonna be paying a little bit of attention because that's how it goes.
And I'm sure you won't be the only one.
There's a pretty good chance of that. It's not a Columbus wedding; it's a Cleveland wedding, but there are certainly going to be some Buckeye fans there. I don't have any doubts about that. So we'll keep our eye on the game along the way. But looking forward to your coverage, and thanks for hopping on and having some fun with us this weekend, and thanks for doing the pod. Absolutely. Can't wait to get down there and see what happens on Saturday night. All right. Follow John on Twitter, and you can certainly see a lot of great photography. He's got lots of great stuff there as well, and can't wait to see what you got coming this weekend. So Ohio State and Wisconsin kicking off Saturday night. Thanks for joining us on Buckeye Breakdown. Again, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Would certainly appreciate your support of the show there. You can find this after the fact, either on YouTube or wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts. And for all the latest on the Bucks, go to BuckeyesNow.com. For Jon Rudder, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you Saturday in Columbus. Big Ten football's back.